Due to a video game series never producing another chapter, certain Legends stories not being continued, or even newer Star Wars stories seemingly moving in a different direction going forward. All of these tantalizing Star Wars cliffhangers will now likely, well, never be resolved. And that's a damn shame too, as the answers had the potential to be quite fascinating. But there were simply other tales to be told, people, and it seems like this collection of events will now be left dangling off the edge of a cliff for eternity. So I'm Gareth, this is What Culture Star Wars, and here are 9 Star Wars cliffhangers we'll never get the answer to. Number 9, Arla Fett. Boba's long-lost aunt has her memory wiped and then just disappears. Introduced during the Jango Fett Open Seasons comic book written by Hayden Blackman, Arla Fett, the older sister of Jango, was actually once assumed dead after Death Watch attacked her family home on Concord Dawn during the Mandalorian Civil War. However, it was later revealed that she was captured by and ultimately became an assassin for Death Watch, before being arrested and thrown into a mental institute on Coruscant. She'd stay there for years and was heavily sedated to stop her from killing herself because of the guilt she felt over working with the group who had killed her family, but was eventually freed by Jedi-turned-Mandalorian Barden Jusik in the Republic Commando novels. In the end, Jusik would wipe a tormented Arla's memory, and that was all Karen Traviss wrote, ending this Fett story on a bit of a cliffhanger really, with Traviss never getting to officially conclude the Republic Commando series after she backed away from the project due to continuity changes made in the Clone Wars animated series. Arla's fate was left largely up in the air. And while those desperately wanting to learn what officially happened to Arla next were at least given a few interesting bullet points from Traviss that explained where she roughly thought the characters were going, Arla would have married Jusik and forgotten she was ever Arla Fett after her memory wipe. That still doesn't technically count as an official conclusion to her story. Now, Star Wars has shown a willingness to incorporate elements from the Legends continuity more and more of late. But the chances of Boba Fett's auntie showing up, meeting her nephew, and then explaining where she'd been in the new canon after all these years still feels slim at best, especially after the flop that was the Book of Boba Fett. Number 8, who is Revan in the new canon? Though fans haven't technically seen the legendary Darth Revan on screen since Disney bought Lucasfilm in 2012, his name has very much been mentioned. But the cliffhanger of precisely when this old Republic icon will go from being little more than the name of a Sith Trooper Legion, or the name mumbled by cultists, to actually showing up in the new canon is still one that shows no signs of being resolved. Though fans did come very close to seeing Revan appear in Star Wars The Clone Wars during the Ghosts of Mortis episode, that scene was ultimately scrapped in the end. However, with the Old Republic era being present on Disney's latest Star Wars timeline last year, fans will definitely be hoping that the long wait for a project set in this much-loved period within the Legends continuity will come to an end in the not-too-distant future. At time of recording though, the planned possibly canon remake of the classic Knights of the Old Republic video game doesn't seem like it'll be clearing up this Revan mystery anytime soon, due to that game going through some development troubles. And there sadly aren't any other new Old Republic stories currently in the works either. So an answer to precisely who Revan was or what this era really looked like in the new canon will probably remain unanswered for some time yet, if not forever. Which part of the Legends continuity do you want to see introduced in the new canon, folks? You let me know in the comments section down below. Number 7, Sev's fate in Republic Commando. Elite Clone Commando Sev is a character fans of the Star Wars Republic Commando video game know all too well. During that game's last mission on Kashyyyk, the rest of Delta Squad hear that the sniper is under heavy attack, but before they can get to their comrade and ensure he's safe from harm, the squad are ordered to evacuate, leaving behind poor Sev. And while Sev would eventually go on to appear in Star Wars The Clone Wars Witches of the Mist episode, fans never actually learned whether he survived that fateful fight on Kashyyyk or not, with Sev simply being reported as missing in action from that point on in Legends continuity, and the Clone Wars episode was set before all this. The Delta Squad member's one-time training sergeant, Waylon Vow, did attempt to find Sev on the planet, but to no avail. A sequel game was also reportedly planned at one point, with one version of it involving Sev playing a big part in starting up the rebellion. But that never came into being, and the new canon just doesn't seem all that interested in the fate of this brave soldier. It appears the answer to this agonizing cliffhanger will remain missing alongside Sev then. Number 6, is Cad Bane actually dead? After making a hell of a name for himself in the animated section of this galaxy far, far away, ruthless bounty hunter Cad Bane finally made his live-action debut in the Book of Boba Fett. Said live-action run was ultimately short-lived, however, as the sharpshooting Duros time in the Star Wars franchise reached its end thanks to his old apprentice and the pointy end of Fett's Gaddafi stick. Or maybe not. The fact Bane's suit is still seen beeping and flashing before the scene ends in that final episode in the series has left many believing this is a sign that he may not be dead after all. But with this cliffhanger coming at the end of a show which received mixed reviews and probably won't be followed up with a season 2 in the coming years, it is highly unlikely that Bane's arc will continue in another chapter of this particular book. If he did indeed survive, there's a chance he could show up in another New Republic era show away from the Book of Boba Fett and face off with Tamura Morrison one more time. However, it's far more likely that Disney will just draw a line under the somewhat disappointing Mandalorian spin-off and Bane's story with Fett, and simply continue using the blue badass in animated projects set before he was stabbed if they really want to bring him back. In other words, the truth behind those blinking lights will probably remain a mystery, folks. Number 5, what was George Lucas's specific plan for Maul and Talon in his sequel trilogy? Before Disney unleashed their version of a sequel trilogy into the world, George Lucas had his own ideas for another collection of movies set after the original Star Wars trilogy, and it was within this plan that something of a fascinating cliffhanger emerged. You see, according to Paul Duncan's Star Wars Archives 1999 to 2005 reference book, Lucas planned to have both an older Darth Maul and Darth Talon, famously created as the villain of the Star Wars Legacy Legends comic series, appear as the key villains in the films. But while it was explained in that same book that in Lucas's version of the sequels, Maul would have become the godfather of crime in the universe after the Empire fell, and Leia and Luke would have been trying to rebuild the Republic and restart the Jedi, respectively, it wasn't really specifically stated how Talon and Maul's story would have fully unfolded on screen. Lucas did refer to Talon as the new Darth Vader, and most of the action was with her, but that's about it, and no other details about the Twi'lek's arc in the films, her relationship with Maul, or encounters with the main heroes were mentioned by the main man himself. Though it is worth noting that Lucasfilm story group member Pablo Hidalgo would actually add that there were seemingly plans to have Talon corrupt Han Solo and Leia Organa's son at one point. Again though, we didn't hear from Lucas. But with George now happily enjoying retirement, the official answers to this intriguing sequel pitch cliffhanger of Lucas's own making will almost certainly remain locked inside of that mind forevermore. Thank you very much for stopping by to check out this What Culture Star Wars list today, my friend. And if you're enjoying what you're watching, then hit that subscribe button down below and you will get more of this wonderful Star Wars content in your life. Number 4, Jabba the Hutt's son is rescued and we hardly ever see him again. Along with introducing the world to the eventual Clone Wars legend that is Ahsoka Tano, 2008's Star Wars The Clone Wars movie also brought with it the arrival of an unexpected son. It turned out that none other than Jabba the Hutt himself had a baby boy by the name of Rotta, with this little slug being kidnapped and later rescued during the poorly received animated picture. And while you'd think something as interesting as one of the most recognizable foes in the galaxy far, far away having a child would be mentioned again in the future, Rotta mostly just disappears after this movie. Now sure, he'd make a brief appearance in the subsequent series during the Sphere of Influence episode, and it was noted in Legends continuity that Jabba actually sent him into hiding to protect him from the Shadow Collective. But it's never actually explained what became of the son of the crime lord in the years that followed the Clone Wars in the new canon. Did he unfortunately perish before the time of Jabba's death in Episode 6, Return of the Jedi? Is he still knocking about in the galaxy far, far away at the time of the Book of Boba Fett? Who knows, eh? But one thing is clear, this is a mystery/cliffhanger that Disney just do not seem all that bothered about answering. What with it now being a whopping 14 years since Rotta's last unmemorable on-screen appearance. It's safe to assume at this point that Rotta's unfinished story will probably stay that way then. Oh, and speaking of missing relatives, number 3, what happened to Cori Cree? Debuting in the Academy episode during Star Wars The Clone Wars 3rd season, Cori Cree was the apparent nephew of Duchess of Mandalore Satine Cree, the young man who looked to follow in his aunt's footsteps as a future leader then would not show up again until Season 5's The Lawless episode, where Corky, along with Bo-Katan Kryze, would attempt to save his aunt from Maul's Shadow Collective. However, they ultimately weren't able to keep Satine from being killed by Maul. It was all very sad. Corky, along with his cadet pals, were able to get away from Maul and his super commandos though, seemingly setting him up for another appearance in the galaxy far, far away further down the line. But as of recording, the figure who many have theorized is actually the secret son of Obi-Wan Kenobi and Satine Kryze has still not reappeared in the Star Wars universe. Boo. Bo-Katan's comments of being the last of her line in the Mandalorian episode The Heiress suggests that Corky will not be popping up in a New Republic-era show in the coming years. However, it's still unclear how his story ends after the cliffhanger of him managing to evade the threat of Maul on his homeworld. And with each passing Corky-less year since his last appearance in 2013, it's increasingly feeling like fans will never see or hear from this important member of House Kryze again. Number 2, what happened to Vader after he was captured by Starkiller? Alongside the Knights of the Old Republic and Republic Commando, the Force Unleashed video games remain some of the most beloved ever to be played by fans of this galaxy far, far away. But it's also a series that ends on one hell of a cliffhanger, one that is still yet to be fully resolved many moons since the second installment's release, and now almost certainly never will. The Force Unleashed 2 contains 2 different conclusions, depending on which side of the Force you choose to walk on, of course. Should the player opt for the dark side ending, they will attempt to kill Darth Vader as Starkiller, only to then be killed themselves by a clone of, well, themselves. That ending isn't considered part of the Legends continuity, however. The light side ending, though? Well, that was, and it involved Vader instead being captured by Starkiller and the Rebel Alliance. He would then be transported to Dantooine, but little did Starkiller and Juno know that Boba Fett was actually following closely behind. It did seem as though a third Force Unleashed game would provide some answers to that wonderful cliffhanger ending, but the game was soon cancelled when Disney bought Lucasfilm and shut down LucasArts. Again, boo. Though the Force Unleashed project lead W. Hayden Blackman would actually later explain that one idea he had for the third game would have seen Fett shoot down Starkiller and Juno's ship, before Starkiller and Vader were then forced to team up to survive, fans still never technically got to see an official answer to this cliffhanger come to life, and they will now forever just have to imagine how that final game would have played out. And number 1, so much of the Acolyte. Without doubt, one of the most memorable pair of cliffhangers to pop up in a TV series in quite some time, the latest Disney Plus live-action Star Wars series, The Acolyte, dropped 2 gigantic master bombshells in its final episode. Before the arrival of everyone's favorite little green legend, Master Yoda, the being that would later go on to guide the eventual Emperor himself would rear their head for the very first time in live action, Darth Plagueis. Those cameos alone were enough to get folks rather excited about what a potential Season 2 of the somewhat divisive show could bring to the Star Wars party. But those enthralling appearances and so many of the other cliffhangers chucked out during the last episode of this first season, including what on earth happens to Osha, May, and the Stranger going forward, will now be a collection of mysteries that will never be answered. The Acolyte was ultimately cancelled due to poor viewership, despite some intriguing storyline developments and mesmerizing characters. So unless Disney are convinced to revive the scrapped show by those out there who enjoyed this first live-action look at the High Republic era, expect all of the aforementioned plot threads to permanently stay hanging off the edge of a cliff.